My name is Jackie J. Hudson, and I was born in 1939, about 6 miles west of where we're at here at the Lead Hill School today. And there was a little community where Bear Creek runs into the White River called Lowry, Arkansas. And it goes back as far as Dubuque Landing at Lead Hill, or where the Sugarloaf boat dock or Lead Hill boat dock is today. And with that said, my relatives and whatever, a lot of them was early settlers back in the 1800s, along in around Lowry and west of here. And I was born and raised just 6 miles west of Lead Hill in the Lowry community. And I'm gonna remnants and run a few things today and tell you that it's happened in my lifetime and prior to that in the 1800s, which my grandmother was raised in the same community that I live in today out around Lowry. And most people today don't realize that probably somewhere a little less or around 200 years ago, the fastest thing in the world that moved on earth was a horse. And we have seen everything progress from that day forward. And all the roads and settlements, of course, everything that come in, the first settlements came in up the White River due to the water travel. And they was settled like in Dubuque Landing and Lowry and so forth. But getting back to spreading out across the country, from Lead Hill, west of Lead Hill, there's a lot of documentation that it was practically all prairie. And again, I will say this, and it's been verified by my grandmother and my mother and different ones. All the roads and stuff that you travel today was primarily made back in the horse and buggy days. And what people don't realize that the horses had to have water, whether they was rode with a saddle and so forth, or they was pulled on a wagon or a cart. So they actually went up the drainages and down the ridges and over the ridges, but they went from water hole to water hole. And today, we go from gas station to gas station. So there's been a terrible change in our lifetime. Getting back to Lowry, Arkansas a little bit, with that said, my mother also was the postmaster back in somewhere in the late 40s and run the store. We sold gasoline, or she did, for something like 15 and 16 cents a gallon. And right there at Lowry, there was a big red 2-story building that was the old grist mill, and it was run by a water mill on the Bear Creek there. And when my mother was a little girl, her dad lived about 3 miles away. He'd pick her up and set her in the saddle and tie a sack of corn in the front of the saddle and a sack of wheat behind. And she'd ride that horse to Lowry, and the miller would set her off of the horse. He would grind it and take out his portion for his fee, tie it back on it, and pick her up and set her back on the horse, and she'd go back home. So she actually took the labor of a human, a grown person. Also, they gin cotton there. There is some documentations. Gus Crumpler, or some of his family, and Roger Vernon, I think, is probably Logan, has still got some of the pictures of showing bales of cotton. The steamboats come up the White River to the mouth of Bear Creek back in the 1800s. And with that said, my great-great-grandparents, Grays, owned a farm on the mouth of Bear Creek and White River. They had one field that was 50 acres, and it was always referred to as the 50-acre field. Now, I'm speaking of the time back in the Civil War, and this is just a little bit of history as what happened to some of my family. But the Grays was in the early 40s. The bushwhackers or renegades or whatever you might want to call them, they came through that part of the country, and they thought since they owned land and raised cotton and so forth that they had money. So they tried to make them tell where their money was. Well, they basically just didn't have no money. There wasn't no money to be had much back in those days. They took coals out of the fireplace and put in a dishpan, set them down and put their feet in them dishpans of coals, and they burnt their feet so bad that they eventually both didn't die right then, but one of them lived a month or two and the other one lived 3 or 4 months, but they eventually set up gangrene and blood poison, and they both died. They had to move their graves when the lake went in. Today they're buried right here above the school. I can show you their graves up there today, and they had to be moved when the lake went in. When the lake went in, it changed this whole part of the country, and the Lake Bull shows didn't go in till in the late 40s. And Harry Truman was the president at that time, and it was the first dam that was ever put on the White River. And he come down somewhere, I don't have the exact date, I could get it, but somewhere in about 50 or 51, and dedicated the dam. It was the 5th largest dam in the nation at that time. Then since then, I have seen Table Rock built and Beaver built on above that. So this whole country has changed considerably.